Story 1. The Cornfields Stranger. In the heart of rural Nebraska, where the horizon stretched endlessly under a sky that seemed to swallow the world whole, 10-year-old Caleb lived a life shaped by the rhythm of the land. His family's modest farmhouse sat on the edge of a sprawling cornfield, its golden stalks swaying like a restless sea under the relentless prairie wind. Every morning, Caleb pedaled his rusty Schwinn bike along the dusty main road to school, a journey that took him past the towering corn, its rows stretching into an impenetrable maze that both fascinated and unnerved him. His parents, weathered by years of toil, had drilled one rule into his young mind: never cut through the cornfield. They spoke of its disorienting depths, how a child could vanish without a trace, swallowed by the stalks with no one to hear their cries. Caleb, obedient but curious, always stuck to the road, even if it meant a longer ride. One autumn afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, Caleb's routine took a fateful turn. His bike chain snapped with a metallic clank, leaving him stranded halfway home. The road stretched endlessly before him, and the thought of pushing his bike for miles under the gathering dusk filled him with dread. He was alone. No cell phone, no neighbors for miles, just the hum of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the corn. His gaze drifted to the field, its rows beckoning like a shortcut to salvation. Despite his parents' warnings, the temptation was overwhelming. "It's just a straight shot," he told himself. "I'll be home in no time." With a deep breath, he pushed his bike into the corn, the stalks closing around him like a living curtain. At first, the path was manageable, the narrow gaps between rows guiding his way. The corn towered over him, twice his height, casting long shadows that danced in the fading light. The air grew heavy, the silence oppressive, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the creak of his bike's wheels. Caleb's heart quickened as the field seemed to shift around him, the rows twisting in ways that defied logic. He glanced back, half expecting to see the road, but there was only more corn, an endless labyrinth swallowing his sense of direction. A faint rustling sound pricked his ears, not the wind, but something deliberate, moving parallel to him. He froze, clutching his bike, his breath hitching as the sound grew closer, then stopped. "It's just an animal," he thought. But the silence that followed was worse, heavy with unspoken menace. Minutes stretched into eternity as Caleb pushed forward, his sneakers sinking into the soft earth. The rustling returned, louder now, keeping pace with his hurried steps. Panic clawed at his chest, but he couldn't abandon his bike. It was his lifeline, his only tie to the world beyond the corn. Then at a junction in the rows, he saw it, a man standing motionless in the middle of the path. He was tall, gaunt, his clothes tattered and stained with dirt. Long, jagged scratches marred his arms, glistening faintly in the dim light. His eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto Caleb's, pinning him in place. "You lost, kid?" the man rasped, his voice like gravel scraped across stone. Caleb's legs turned to jelly, his voice trapped in his throat. The man took a step forward, his lips curling into a smile that held no warmth. "I can help you find your way." Instinct screamed at Caleb to run, but fear rooted him to the spot. The man moved closer, his hands outstretched, a length of rope dangling from one fist. That snapped Caleb out of his paralysis. Dropping his bike, he bolted, the corn whipping at his face as he plunged deeper into the field. Behind him, the man gave chase, his heavy footsteps crashing through the stalks, his shouts echoing in the twilight. "Come back, kid! I just want to help!" Caleb's lungs burned, his heart pounding as he zigzagged through the rows, ducking low to hide among the stalks. He curled into a ball, eyes squeezed shut, praying the man would pass. The rustling grew closer, then paused. "I'll find you," the man muttered, his voice chillingly calm. Caleb held his breath, trembling, as the footsteps faded into the distance. Hours later, when the night had fully descended, Caleb crept out of his hiding spot, his body aching from the cold and fear. He stumbled through the corn, guided only by the faint glow of stars, until he finally emerged near his house. The warm lights of home were a beacon, but his relief was short-lived. His parents, frantic with worry, enveloped him in hugs as he sobbed out the story. His mother's tears soaked his hair, while his father's face darkened with rage. They searched for the bike the next day, but it was gone, swallowed by the field. Life resumed, but the shadow of that night lingered, a silent scar on Caleb's childhood. Weeks later, as the first frost kissed the ground, Caleb arrived home from school to find a chilling sight. His bike, the one he'd abandoned, propped against the porch. Its frame was scratched, the handlebars twisted, as if it had been dragged through hell. His parents' faces paled, and within days they packed up and left Nebraska, fleeing a threat they couldn't name. Caleb never forgot the man in the cornfield, his raspy voice echoing in nightmares that followed him into adulthood. The field had let him go, but it had claimed something else, his innocence in the safety of the world he once knew. Story 2, The Shadow in the Corn. At 28, Ethan Harper was a man adrift, his dreams of literary stardom reduced to a string of rejection letters from publishers. Disillusioned, he returned to his family's farm in Nebraska, a place he'd sworn never to see again. The sprawling fields, once a playground for his childhood adventures, now felt like a prison of memories. His parents, weathered by age and the relentless demands of the land, needed help, and Ethan, with nowhere else to go, answered the call. The farm was a world unto itself, surrounded by endless rows of corn that whispered secrets in the wind. The nearest neighbor, an elderly widow named Martha, lived a 10-minute walk away, her small farm a solitary outpost in the sea of green. Ethan settled into a routine, tending to chores by day and writing by night in a cramped third-floor bedroom. The solitude suited him, the quiet nights fueling his creativity as he poured his frustrations into stories of loss and redemption. From his window, he could see the cornfield stretching into the distance, its golden expanse glowing under the setting sun. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of his city life, and for a while Ethan felt he'd found a fragile kind of peace. But peace, it seemed, was not meant to last. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of dusk, Ethan noticed a figure standing at the far edge of the cornfield. It was little more than a silhouette, motionless between two rows, blending into the shadows like a specter. At first, he dismissed it as a neighbor, perhaps Martha checking her land. The figure wasn't on their property, so Ethan let it go, though the stillness of it, unmoving, almost inhuman, gnawed at him. Night after night, the figure returned, always at the same time, always in the same spot, a silent sentinel in the twilight. Ethan watched from his window, his curiosity turning to unease. It wasn't a scarecrow. He saw it shift once, a subtle movement that confirmed it was human. But who would stand so still, night after night, staring into the distance? As days turned to weeks, the figure grew bolder, appearing closer to the house each evening. It never crossed the property line, but its presence felt like a violation, a silent challenge. Ethan's parents, when he finally mentioned it, were oddly dismissive. His mother suggested it was Martha's son, a troubled young man who'd always been a bit off, though she hadn't seen him in years. His father, ever pragmatic, told Ethan to ignore it, insisting it was harmless. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The figure's relentless presence was no accident. It was deliberate, calculated, and it was getting closer. One night, unable to stand the uncertainty, Ethan decided to act. As he worked late in the barn, repairing a tractor under the glow of a single bulb, he glanced toward the field and felt his blood run cold. The figure was no longer at the edge. It stood just beyond the property line, closer than ever, its silhouette stark against the moonlit corn. Anger and fear surged through him, and he grabbed a flashlight, striding toward the field. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the still night. The figure turned and bolted, disappearing into the corn with unnatural speed. Ethan gave chase, his boots pounding the earth, but the rows swallowed the intruder like a ghost. He stopped, heart racing, scanning the field for any sign of movement. Nothing, just the endless rustle of the corn. The next morning, Ethan visited Martha, hoping for answers. The old woman, frail and leaning on a cane, listened with growing confusion as he described the figure. "I haven't been out after dark in months," she said, her voice trembling. "My health won't allow it." When Ethan asked about her son, her eyes clouded with sorrow. "He left years ago, hasn't been back since." The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow. The figure wasn't Martha's son. It was a stranger, someone who didn't belong. He left her farm with a sinking dread, the weight of an unseen threat pressing down on him. Back home, Ethan's parents finally took him seriously. His mother wanted to call the police, but his father, stubborn as ever, argued it was pointless without evidence of a crime. They agreed Ethan would keep watch, waking his father if the figure returned. For a few nights, the field was empty, and Ethan dared to hope the stranger had moved on. But hope, like peace, was fleeting. Late one evening, as he finished chores in the barn, the world plunged into darkness. The power cut out, plunging the farm into an inky void. Ethan's pulse spiked as he fumbled for a flashlight, his mind racing to the breaker box in the figure that had haunted his nights. Outside, the beam of his flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing nothing but the swaying corn. Then he heard it, a faint rustling, close, too close. His breath caught as he swept the light across the field, catching a glimpse of movement. There, just feet from the barn, stood a man, bald, gaunt, dressed in tattered overalls. His eyes gleamed with a predatory intensity, and in his hand, he clutched a rusty garden trowel, its edge glinting in the light. Ethan's fear turned to panic as the man lunged forward, his footsteps heavy in the dirt. Ethan sprinted for the cornfield, the only cover he could think of, his flashlight bobbing wildly. He dove into the rows, crouching low as the man's footsteps thundered past, his muttered curses fading into the night. Trembling, Ethan waited until silence returned, then bolted for the house. He woke his parents and called the police, who searched the property but found nothing, except the breaker box, soaked with water, deliberately sabotaged. The next day, Ethan and his parents installed security cameras and motion lights, but the damage was done. The farm no longer felt safe. A month later, Ethan left, unable to bear the thought of his parents alone, with a predator lurking in the shadows. They hired a farmhand, and Ethan moved on. But the memory of that night, of the man in the corn, and the terror of being hunted, clung to him like a second skin. Some nights he still woke in a cold sweat, certain he heard the rustle of corn outside his window. Story 3. The Fire in the Field. After years of chasing dreams in the city, 32-year-old Lucas Kane found himself in Iowa, a place as foreign to him as the moon. Burned out and broke, he'd taken a dead-end job at a local warehouse, trading the neon pulse of urban life for the quiet of the countryside. His new home was a modest rental on the edge of a vast cornfield, its rows stretching to the horizon like a living fortress. The house was small, but the land was expansive, a sprawling backyard that blurred into the field, separated only by a flimsy wooden fence. Lucas, a city boy at heart, found the isolation strangely soothing. At night, he'd sit on the back deck, a cigarette glowing in the dark, staring into the corn as it swayed under the stars. It was a place to rebuild, to find himself again. Or so he thought. October brought a chill to the air, the kind that settled into your bones and made you crave the warmth of a fire. One windy night, Lucas stood on the deck, the cold biting at his fingertips as he took a final drag on his cigarette. The cornfield loomed before him, its stalks rustling in the gusts, a restless giant under the moonless sky. He was about to head inside when a sound pierced the night, a scream, sharp and unmistakably human, echoing from the heart of the field. It wasn't the distant cry of a fox or the screech of an owl. It was a child's voice, high and desperate, laced with terror. Lucas's heart lurched. He froze, straining to hear it again, but the wind carried only silence. Without hesitation, he ran inside, grabbed his hunting rifle, and sprinted toward the field. The scream came again, louder, closer, urging him forward. He vaulted the fence, his boots sinking into the soft earth, and plunged into the corn, using his phone's weak flashlight to navigate the rows. "Hey, kid!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the field. "Scream again! I'm coming!" But there was no reply, only the relentless rustle of the corn. Lucas pushed deeper, his adrenaline surging, his mind racing with images of a lost child, hurt or worse. He called out again and again, but the field remained silent, its secrets buried in the dark. Realizing he was out of his depth, Lucas called the police, his voice shaking as he explained what he'd heard. He returned to the house, pacing the deck until 2 officers arrived. Determined to help, he joined their search, combing the field for nearly an hour. They called out, their flashlights slicing through the darkness, but found nothing. No footprints, no broken stalks, no sign of a child or anyone else. The officers, sympathetic but skeptical, suggested it might have been a prank, a cruel trick by bored local kids. They told Lucas to call if he heard anything else and left him standing in the cold, his frustration boiling over. A prank didn't sit right. That scream had been too raw, too real. Back inside, Lucas tried to shake off the unease, convincing himself it was nothing. But as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, a flicker of light caught his eye. He rushed to the window, his breath catching in his throat. In the distance, a faint orange glow pulsed in the cornfield, small flames licking at the stalks. "Holy shit," he muttered, his voice trembling. The fire was small but growing, fanned by the wind, threatening to consume the field and his house. Panic surged through him as he dialed 911, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He grabbed the garden hose from the side of the house, leaped the fence and sprinted toward the flames, praying the hose would reach. The fire roared as he approached, its heat searing his face. Lucas sprayed the flames, his arms aching as he fought to contain the blaze. The wind howled, scattering embers, but he held his ground, dousing the fire until it sputtered out. Soaked and exhausted, he leaned over, gasping for breath, his mind reeling. Who would do this, he thought, the question gnawing at him. As he straightened, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, and his blood ran cold. At the upstairs window of his house, his bedroom, stood a figure, a dark silhouette against the glass. Terror gripped him, but anger pushed him forward. Dropping the hose, he sprinted back to the house, throwing open the door. The kitchen was a war zone. The fridge gaped open, food spilled across the counter, cabinets ransacked, dishes shattered on the floor. Lucas's pulse pounded in his ears as he heard the front door slam. He raced outside, but the intruder was gone, vanished into the night. He scanned the darkness, his rifle heavy in his hands, but exhaustion overwhelmed him. He sank to the porch, his mind spinning with the chaos of the night. When the police and firefighters arrived, Lucas recounted everything: the scream, the fire, the break-in. This time they took it seriously, treating the fire as attempted arson. More officers arrived along with police dogs, but the search yielded nothing. The intruder had fled, leaving no trace. For weeks, Lucas lived on edge, sleeping with his rifle beside him, jumping at every sound. The scream haunted him, a chilling reminder that a child might have been out there, needing help he couldn't give. Unable to bear the fear, he moved out soon after, leaving the cornfield behind but carrying its mysteries with him. Some nights he still heard that scream in his dreams, a call from the dark he could never answer.